traffic RV on a 9-mile final.
Qatar 3372, clear to line up on waiting in runway 1.
Why is a Middle Eastern airline flying deep into Latin America? Qatar Cargo's aggressive expansion into South America isn't just about delivering packages, it's part of a geopolitical strategy that's reshaping global trade flows, and the competitive response from FedEx and established Latin American carriers reveals just how disruptive this expansion really is. What I discovered about Qatar's route selection and partnership strategy is going to change how you think about cargo aviation, and the economic implications of connecting Middle Eastern trade hubs directly to Latin American markets are staggering. Cargo diplomacy is real, and Qatar's winning. Let's start with the fundamental question. Why would Qatar Airways Cargo, based in a small Gulf nation, invest heavily in Latin American routes that are thousands of miles from their home base? The answer reveals everything about how modern cargo aviation shapes global commerce. Qatar sits at the crossroads of Europe, Asia, and Africa, making Doha Hamad International Airport one of the world's most strategically positioned cargo hubs. But Latin America has traditionally been outside Qatar's natural catchment area, served primarily by North American carriers and local South American airlines. However, trade between the Middle East and Latin America has grown by over 300% in the past decade, driven by energy partnerships, construction projects, and emerging market commerce. Traditional routing through European or North American hubs adds time, cost, and complexity to these trade flows. If you're fascinated by how global airline strategies shape international trade and geopolitics, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We dive deep into the strategic decisions that connect the world's economies. Qatar Cargo operates one of the world's largest fleets of Boeing 777 freighters, over 30 aircraft optimized for long-haul cargo operations. These aircraft have the range to fly directly from Doha to major Latin American destinations, eliminating the need for intermediate stops or connections. But Qatar's expansion faces established competition from FedEx, UPS, LATAM Cargo, and other carriers that have served Latin American markets for decades. Breaking into these established markets requires more than just having good aircraft. It requires strategic advantages that incumbents can't easily match. Those strategic advantages come from Qatar's unique position in global trade networks and their willingness to think beyond traditional cargo aviation. Qatar Cargo's Latin American network centers on key strategic destinations that maximize connectivity and trade flow potential. We're not talking about random city selections. Every route serves multiple strategic purposes. The Doha to São Paulo route serves as Qatar's primary Latin American gateway, connecting Brazil's commercial capital directly to Middle Eastern and Asian markets. This route handles everything from Brazilian agricultural exports to Middle Eastern manufactured goods and Asian electronics. The Doha to Bogotá route reveals the staggering economic implications of connecting Middle Eastern trade hubs directly to Latin American markets. Colombia's flour exports, coffee, and emerging manufacturing sectors gain direct access to Gulf markets, while Colombian importers can source directly from Asia and the Middle East without European or North American intermediaries. Direct routing saves 24 to 48 hours compared to connections through Miami, Frankfurt, or Amsterdam, and reduces handling costs by eliminating intermediate stops. For time-sensitive cargo like fresh produce, pharmaceuticals, or high-tech components, this advantage is decisive. Qatar's strategy leverages Doha as a super connector hub that can consolidate cargo from across Asia, Europe, and Africa for distribution to Latin America. Instead of point-to-point routes, they're creating a hub-and-spoke system that maximizes aircraft utilization and cargo volumes. A single Qatar Cargo flight to São Paulo might carry electronics from South Korea, textiles from Bangladesh, machinery from Germany, and pharmaceuticals from Switzerland, all consolidated through Doha for efficient distribution in Latin America. Flight schedules are optimized to connect with Qatar's broader network, allowing same-day connections from most Asian and European origins to Latin American destinations. This connectivity creates service levels that competitors struggle to match. Qatar Cargo isn't operating in isolation. They're building strategic partnerships with local ground handlers, customs brokers, and even competing airlines to create comprehensive logistics solutions. Partnerships with regional carriers allow Qatar Cargo to extend their reach beyond primary destinations to secondary cities throughout Latin America, creating network coverage that would be impossible with their own aircraft alone. What I discovered about Qatar's route selection and partnership strategy reveals a sophisticated understanding of Latin American trade patterns and political relationships that goes far beyond typical cargo operations. Qatar's cargo expansion into Latin America serves multiple purposes beyond commercial aviation. It's part of a broader strategy to diversify Qatar's international relationships and reduce dependence on traditional Western trade partners. Qatar has signed bilateral trade agreements with Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina that specifically include aviation services provisions. These agreements create regulatory frameworks that facilitate cargo operations while building political relationships that support broader Qatari interests. Many of Qatar's Latin American routes coincide with energy sector partnerships. Qatar's liquefied natural gas expertise is valuable to Latin American countries developing their own gas resources, while Latin American renewable energy projects attract Qatari investment. The 2017 to 2021 Gulf blockade demonstrated Qatar's vulnerability to regional political pressures. Expanding trade relationships with Latin America provides strategic diversification that reduces dependence on neighboring countries and traditional trade routes. Qatar Cargo's Latin American network creates alternative supply chain routings that bypass potentially hostile territories or politically unstable regions. This supply chain security has become increasingly valuable in an era of trade wars and regional conflicts. Cargo aviation often precedes broader investment relationships. Qatar's sovereign wealth fund has increased investments in Latin American infrastructure, agriculture, and technology sectors, facilitated partly by the logistics connections that cargo flights provide. The 2022 FIFA World Cup in Qatar created cultural connections with Latin American countries that have strong football traditions. These connections provide soft power benefits that support commercial relationships, including cargo aviation partnerships. Qatar Foundation's educational initiatives in Latin America create people-to-people connections that support long-term commercial relationships. Many of these programs require logistics support that Qatar Cargo provides. But geopolitical strategy means nothing without operational excellence and competitive advantages that deliver real results. Qatar Cargo's aggressive expansion into South America is possible because their Boeing 777F fleet is perfectly suited for long-range, high-volume cargo operations that Latin American routes demand. The 777F can carry up to 103 tons of cargo over distances exceeding 9,000 kilometers, making direct flights from Doha to major Latin American cities operationally feasible. This eliminates the fuel stops and technical stops that smaller cargo aircraft would require. Qatar Cargo optimizes 777F loading to maximize revenue per flight by combining high-value, low-weight cargo with dense, lower-value freight. A typical Latin American flight might carry electronics and pharmaceuticals in the upper deck, with automotive parts and machinery in the lower hold. Doha's cargo facilities are designed for rapid transit of international freight, with automated sorting systems that can process and reload cargo in under 90 minutes for connecting flights. This efficiency is crucial for maintaining competitive transit times on complex routing. Qatar has streamlined customs and regulatory procedures for transit cargo, allowing goods to pass through Doha with minimal paperwork and delay. This contrasts with many traditional cargo hubs where bureaucratic processes add hours or days to transit times. specialized handling capabilities for temperature-sensitive cargo like pharmaceuticals and fresh produce give Qatar Cargo advantages in high-value market segments where service quality commands premium pricing. Qatar Airways' extensive passenger network creates synergies with cargo operations, allowing belly freight capacity on passenger flights to supplement dedicated freighter operations. This provides flexibility and additional revenue opportunities. Qatar's consolidated operations at Doha create economies of scale in maintenance, crew training, and operational support that reduce unit costs compared to competitors operating from multiple bases with smaller scale operations. Qatar's position as a major energy producer provides advantages in fuel procurement and pricing that can translate to competitive advantages in fuel-intensive long-haul cargo operations. These operational advantages are creating market disruption that established carriers are struggling to counter. The competitive response from FedEx and established Latin American carriers reveals just how disruptive Qatar's expansion really is, forcing established players to reconsider their network strategies and pricing models. FedEx has historically dominated Latin American express cargo through their Miami hub and extensive ground networks. Qatar's direct routing and competitive pricing challenge this hub-centric model by offering faster transit times at lower costs for many origin-destination pairs. Qatar Cargo's pricing strategies undercut established carriers by 15 to 25% on many routes, while offering equal or superior transit times. This pricing pressure forces competitors to either match prices and reduce margins or lose market share. LATAM Cargo, as the region's largest cargo airline, has responded to Qatar's expansion by adjusting their network strategy, adding frequencies on competitive routes, and developing their own Asian partnerships to counter Qatar's connectivity advantages. LATAM has announced partnerships with Singapore Airlines Cargo and China Airlines Cargo to improve their Asian connectivity. But these partnerships require complex interline arrangements that can't match Qatar's single carrier convenience. LATAM is accelerating fleet renewal plans, adding Boeing 767 freighters, and considering larger aircraft to compete more effectively with Qatar's 777F capacity and economics. Express integrators like DHL and UPS are also affected by Qatar's expansion, particularly in time-sensitive markets where Qatar's direct routing provides service advantages that are difficult to counter with hub-based networks. Qatar Cargo can deliver cargo from Asian origins to Latin American destinations in 24 to 36 hours, compared to 48 to 72 hours for traditional routing through North American or European hubs. This service advantage is particularly valuable for high-tech and pharmaceutical shipments. Qatar focuses on high-value, time-sensitive cargo segments where service advantages justify premium pricing, allowing them to achieve strong margins while gaining market share from incumbents. This market disruption is creating ripple effects throughout Latin American logistics and trade patterns. Qatar Cargo's expansion is fundamentally changing how Latin American businesses source products and serve export markets. Traditional supply chains, routed through North American or European hubs, are being replaced by direct connections to Asian and Middle Eastern suppliers and customers. Colombian flour exporters now have direct access to Gulf markets through Qatar's Bogotá flights, creating new revenue opportunities and reducing their dependence on traditional North American and European markets. Brazilian aerospace manufacturers can ship components directly to Asian assembly facilities via Qatar's network, reducing inventory costs and improving production efficiency for global aircraft manufacturers. Qatar's specialized pharmaceutical logistics capabilities enable Latin American countries to access Asian generic drug manufacturers directly, reducing healthcare costs and improving drug availability in underserved markets. Improved cargo connectivity attracts foreign investment by reducing logistics costs and improving supply chain reliability. Several Asian manufacturers have announced Latin American facility expansions, specifically citing improved cargo connectivity as a factor. Latin American agricultural producers gain direct access to growing Asian markets, particularly for premium products like coffee, cocoa, and specialty foods, where Qatar's quality-focused service model provides value. Latin American technology companies benefit from reduced costs and faster delivery times for Asian components, while gaining better access to Asian markets for their products and services. Qatar's hub operations create opportunities for improved intra-regional trade within Latin America by providing efficient connections between countries that lack direct cargo services. Cargo connections often precede passenger service development, and Qatar's cargo expansion lays groundwork for potential future passenger routes that could boost tourism and business travel between Latin America and the Middle East/Asia. These trade pattern changes are creating new opportunities, but also new challenges for regional economies and businesses. Qatar Cargo's expansion requires complex regulatory approvals and bilateral aviation agreements that reflect broader diplomatic relationships between Qatar and Latin American governments. Qatar has negotiated expanded traffic rights with Brazil, Colombia, and Argentina that allow increased cargo frequencies and new route opportunities. These agreements often include provisions for future passenger service development. Trade facilitation agreements streamline customs procedures for Qatar Cargo shipments, reducing bureaucratic delays and making Qatar's services more competitive compared to carriers from countries with more complex trade relationships. Qatar's expansion challenges traditional North American influence in Latin American logistics, potentially reducing Latin American dependence on U.S. trade routes and creating more diversified international relationships. Qatar's network competes with Chinese cargo airlines and shipping companies that are also expanding Latin American services, creating complex competitive dynamics that reflect broader geopolitical rivalries. Enhanced cargo screening and security protocols are required for Middle East Latin America routes, reflecting security concerns and international compliance requirements that add operational complexity but demonstrate commitment to safe operations. Several Latin American countries are negotiating expanded aviation agreements with Gulf states that could facilitate further Qatar Cargo expansion and potentially allow competitor airlines like Emirates, Sky Cargo, or Etihad Cargo to enter similar markets. Growing environmental regulations in Latin America may favor newer, more efficient aircraft like Qatar's 777F fleet over older cargo aircraft operated by some competitors, providing additional competitive advantages. Looking ahead, Qatar's Latin American expansion sets the stage for even more dramatic changes in global cargo aviation. Qatar Cargo's Latin American success is driving plans for further expansion, including potential routes to Chile, Peru, and Mexico that would create comprehensive regional coverage and additional competitive pressure on incumbent carriers. Qatar is evaluating the Boeing 777X freighter as a potential replacement for their current 777F fleet, offering increased capacity and efficiency that could support even more aggressive Latin American expansion. Successful cargo operations often precede passenger route development, and Qatar Airways is studying potential passenger services to Sao Paulo and Bogotá that would leverage the cargo network's ground infrastructure and market knowledge. Qatar's success in Latin America demonstrates the potential for Middle Eastern cargo hubs to challenge traditional North American and European hubs in markets far from their natural geographic catchment areas. Qatar's Latin American expansion connects with broader Asian connectivity initiatives, potentially creating integrated logistics networks that span from East Asia through the Middle East to Latin America. Qatar Cargo is investing in digital logistics platforms that provide end-to-end supply chain visibility and management, creating service differentiators that pure transportation competitors struggle to match. Established carriers are developing counter strategies, including their own Middle Eastern partnerships, direct Asian route development, and enhanced service offerings designed to compete with Qatar's advantages. Qatar's expansion may accelerate consolidation in Latin American cargo markets as smaller carriers struggle to compete with the service levels and pricing that global carriers can provide. The success or failure of Qatar's Latin American strategy will influence cargo aviation development worldwide. Qatar Cargo's Latin American expansion demonstrates that successful aviation strategies often require thinking beyond traditional geographic markets and competitive boundaries. The success of Doha as a global cargo hub proves that geographic advantages, when combined with strategic vision and operational excellence, can overcome larger competitors with more resources. Qatar's expansion benefits from government support and strategic planning that allows long-term investment in market development, demonstrating advantages that state-supported carriers can have over purely commercial operators. Successful international cargo expansion requires understanding local trade patterns, regulatory environments, and competitive dynamics, rather than simply applying home market strategies to new regions. Qatar's success in building local partnerships and regulatory relationships demonstrates that international aviation success requires more than operational capabilities. It requires diplomatic and commercial relationship building. Qatar's expansion represents broader industry trends toward multiple competing hub systems, rather than dominated by traditional Western aviation powers, creating more options and competition for cargo customers worldwide. Success in competitive international markets requires continuous innovation in service offerings, operational efficiency, and customer relationship management, rather than relying solely on basic transportation services. Qatar's Latin American expansion is more than a business story. It's a case study in how aviation shapes global commerce and international relationships. Qatar Cargo's expansion into Latin America represents more than airline route development. It's a demonstration of how aviation strategy can reshape global trade patterns and international relationships. By creating direct connections between Latin America and Asian/Middle Eastern markets, Qatar is facilitating trade relationships that bypass traditional Western intermediaries, potentially shifting global economic power balances. The success of Qatar's expansion forces all international cargo carriers to reconsider their network strategies, potentially leading to more aggressive expansion into new markets and more competitive pricing for cargo customers worldwide. Qatar's approach demonstrates that successful aviation strategies in the 21st century require global thinking, strategic patience, and willingness to challenge established market structures. The broader lesson is that aviation infrastructure doesn't just follow economic development. It can drive economic development by creating new opportunities for trade, investment, and international cooperation. This is cargo diplomacy in action, and it's changing the world one route at a time. If this deep dive into global airline strategy and cargo diplomacy opened your eyes to how aviation shapes international trade, definitely hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We track the strategic moves that connect the world's economies. I'm really curious about your thoughts on this expansion. Have you noticed Qatar Cargo flights at your airport? Or do you work in industries affected by changing cargo routes? What's the most obscure cargo route you know about? Drop a comment and let me know. I love hearing about the hidden connections in global trade. If you support global cargo coverage and want to see more airlines connecting underserved markets, smash that like button. Your support helps us continue covering these strategic decisions that reshape international commerce. To stay up to date on current aviation news and developments, click on this video right here for the latest updates from the world of commercial aviation. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this analysis of global airline strategy, hit that like button, subscribe to track global airline strategy, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss our latest videos.